Someone once said that tragedy plus time equals comedy. In my last video, I took a look at the ancient Greek tragedy, and today we'll be having a look at the ancient Greek comedy. Now before we start, I'm sure you've noticed that there's a little bit of a different setup going on. I just want to try out some new things, so instead of having to move all the furniture to my little backdrop that I've got on my books, I'm deciding that I'm going to do it from my PC. I've also got a new microphone, so fingers crossed the audio sounds a lot better. So, in the last video, we looked at the festival of Dionysus and how tragedies fitted into that 5-day structure. Like tragedies, comedies were also performed at the festival. Now, ancient Greek comedy can be categorised into different periods, much like most of ancient Greek history. The first is Old Comedy in around the 5th century BCE, following that timeline of Greek tragedy as well. The most prominent old comic was Aristophanes, whose works were often satirical of the political order and were also quite rude and risque. So let's go back to Aristotle, who we talked about in the last video, and what he had to say about comedy. Now I know that Aristotle is quite a problematic source, but he's the most reliable, so we'll just have to roll with it, okay? The word comedy itself is believed to have its roots in the Greek word komedia, I believe that's how you pronounce it, and from komodos, komos meaning revel and eidos meaning singer, put together it means comic poet. The word comedy itself is rooted in the verb to revel. Now Aristotle wrote that comedy began out of phallic songs, and the development of comedy is believed to have passed quietly, unlike tragedy. He claimed that comedy hadn't as much attention paid to it as tragedy did, so its sort of transgression really was quite quiet and no one really noticed it. But again, that's just Aristotle. He claimed that comedy was the imitation of inferior people, whereas tragedy looked at people of high esteem. Now, Middle comedy is one of the more trickier parts of the comic history to sort of have a look at, largely due to the fact that there is no complete middle comic plays that have survived to this day. Middle comedy is believed to have developed around the 4th century BCE, certainly around the time of Aristophanes' later life and eventual death, but more importantly, around the time of the Peloponnesian War. The Peloponnesian War was a turning point in Greek history. It saw the overthrow of Athens' power in the region in favour of Spartan hegemony. As far as I know, and from what I've researched for this video, Middle Comedy was a period of early transformation towards New Comedy. So during this time, it's believed that the role of the chorus was diminished, public characters weren't impersonated, i.e. they weren't political satire plays anymore, and the things that were lampooned were general ideas rather than political entities. Aristophanes' Plutus is a great example that marks this shift from old comedy to middle comedy. So now we've got old and middle out the way, let's move towards new comedy. New comedy developed in around the 3rd to the 2nd century BCE, and by this time the chorus wasn't such a huge part as it once was, and these comedies focused on private lives of private citizens. Stock characters were also built upon further during this period, so we had characters such as the young lovers, the cunning slave, and the cruel father. And during this time there were two great comic writers, Philemon and Menander. I believe that's how you pronounce it, I'm not 100% sure. Both of whom had their own styles. Now, Menander looked at the fears of the ordinary person, whilst Philemon's comedies were quite smart and intelligent. The Greek comedy didn't die out with the eventual end of the ancient Greeks though. In fact, when the Roman Empire conquered Greece in around 146 BCE, Roman writers attributed Greek comedies as their influences. Typically, Roman plays were more or less exact copies of the old ancient Greek texts. In fact, Greek new comedies were reinvented as fabula palliata, or plays in Greek dress. Palliata or palliata comes from pallium, which is a Latin for a Greek style of dress or cloak, so the term referred to an actor who wore such an outfit. Now, Roman playwrights such as Plautus or Platus adapted the new comic style by fast-paced, pun-filled informal language, and the metre in which they were written suggests that they were meant to be performed alongside music, which is possibly early signs of musical comedy. What's interesting is that of the surviving Roman plays, all of them are believed to be fabula palliata, meaning that they're all set in Greek locations. None are believed to be fabula togata. I got there in the end. Plays set in Roman locations. Plautus's comedies typically turned the traditional order and societal hierarchy on its head. Often, his plays, his comedies, saw the underdog winning, those with the least power in Roman society. On the other hand, we had Terence, another Roman playwright who started life as a slave, who was more constrained in his writing. Terence often followed the structures seen in the Greek New Comedy rather than Roman comedy. However, it's believed that audiences didn't really like it, and there are some evidence to suggest that audiences left his plays to see other things. However, during the Middle Ages, and I know we're jumping forward now, his plays were examples of really good Latin. They were used to teach students Latin, despite the fact that they weren't very popular plays. Both playwrights developed the stock characters that we saw in the Middle and New comic periods. For example, there was the role of the unmarried man in pursuit of a low-status woman who's later revealed to be a free woman and who can marry him. There was also the pimp, the parasite, the wife/mother, the unmarried woman. And Roman comedies were typically performed at Roman public festivals. And did you know it wasn't until around 55 BCE that the first permanent theatre was built in the empire? And this was because of a few reasons. The first reason is that theatre wasn't as popular as the other events in Rome, such as the gladiator fights, the chariot racing, circus performances. And the second reason is that high-ranking officials believed that spending too much time in the theatre would corrupt the Republic. Roman theatres were built in the same style as the Greek theatres. Public opinion of actors were quite low in the Republic. And whilst there were some few famous actors, many were slaves who faced beatings for their unsatisfactory performances. And that's all we have time for today. If you want to know about theatre history, performance, acting, whatever, be sure to like, comment and subscribe. And I hope you enjoyed the new setup. See you soon!